And good afternoon, America. You know me, Ann Vandersteel. I am here today opening with a political shockwave that legacy media is doing everything it can to bury. Perhaps you haven't seen it, but there is a brand new, and I mean, this is a shocker, a real shocker, a brand new Real Clear Politics poll. The same poll you're seeing on the screen shows something very extraordinary happening in the North Carolina Senate race. Grassroots candidate Don Brown, a Navy JAG officer and former federal prosecutor, is now essentially tied with the former Republican National Committee chairman, Michael Whatley, in a hypothetical matchup to take on Democrat Roy Cooper. Hypothetical? Is it really? It sounds like this is getting really heated. That's right. Despite being outspent by at least 100 to 1, despite having zero national institutional support, despite facing a candidate who has the full weight of the RNC, the state GOP, and even President Trump's prior endorsement, Don Brown is neck and neck with the establishment favorite. Establishment. You know how I feel about that word. Now ask yourself, how is this even possible? This is what we now know to be, and it should be happening everywhere, in fact, as a grassroots uprising. North Carolinians are sending a message loud and clear that they will not be told who their nominees should be. They're rejecting political coronations. They're choosing a Marine minded fighter who actually speaks to their lived experience, from failures after Hurricane Helene to the abuses of FEMA, to the danger of unregulated rare earth mineral extraction, to DCF violations that are ripping children from families without due process. And in just 70 days, the early voting starts. Today, we're going to bring the conversation that the political class doesn't want you to hear. Joining us now is Don Brown, a Navy JAG officer, a veteran advocate, former federal prosecutor, and the grassroots candidate shaking the North Carolina GOP establishment to its core. Don, it is great to have you here on Steel News. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have got a lot of ground to cover, and frankly, you are the explosion on the political scene that they don't want to recognize.
Well, thank you, Ann. No, they don't want to recognize me, but they don't more significantly, they don't want to recognize our supporters. That is conservative patriots, America First grassroots, who are sick and tired of having establishment apparatus trying to ram candidates down our throats. In 2016, they tried to ram Jeb Bush down our throats. You saw how that went.
Right.
Democrats tried to ram Kamala down the Democrat Party's throat. Now they're trying to ram Whatley down the Republican throats in North Carolina. The guy's not popular. There are some people who nod their head and support him only because Trump said so. But you got to have more than that in order to win a race like this. So the poll that you mentioned is extraordinary. We can go into that a little bit more detail, but I'm just grateful for you and for the opportunity to be here and speak for a few minutes this morning.
Oh, certainly. So we're gonna take this to the limit here because voters are seeing something that the establishment isn't seeing in their chosen candidate. This is somewhat of a rhetorical question, but there's enough media out there. There's even enough, should we say, non-establishment media, podcasters, and so forth. Why is it that you think the media is trying to bury this story? Because this truly is a political earthquake, yet barely a whisper on the mainstream coverage. Really not unexpected. But is it podcasters aren't getting the message to what's happening in North Carolina?
Part of course, is that the establishment media has been given a signal to pay us no mind, and we've had to fight and struggle, just to get interviews. Now we have a wonderful publicist, and we've done well considering. But I won't call out any major networks that have made us work like a dog just to get 1/4 of the time that Whatley has gotten. But in this particular case, the interesting about the poll, it was conducted by a group here in North Carolina called Carolina Journal. Carolina Journal is a middle of the road Republican type of publication. They're pro Whatley. They had not even used my name once. And then toward the end of November, this poll comes out and shows Whatley and I in a statistical tie against Cooper. Now, that's interesting for a number of reasons. He's outspent us. He has the president's endorsement. Of course, I've got Ann Vandersteel and Sidney Powell and General Mike Flynn and Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, General Jerry Boykin. I have a host of patriots that I wouldn't swap for anybody, and I love you all. And that's making a difference. But this particular organization, Carolina Journal, had not even mentioned my name at all until they published this poll showing me and Whatley both running neck and neck in a statistical tie against Cooper almost a year before the election. Now, what they did not show is significant, and they did not show me and Whatley one-on-one. But my suspicion is you're not going to poll Brown versus Cooper, Whatley versus Cooper, and failed to poll Brown versus Watley. My suspicion is they're holding that third poll because it's embarrassing to their candidate. We've seen a number of snap polls on Twitter and other internet sites showing us running away with this thing. Of course, you might argue, well, those aren't quote unquote scientific, but they are certainly a pulse of what the grassroots are saying and feeling here on the ground in North Carolina. So it's interesting. It really is.
It certainly is. I look at this as possibly becoming a referendum on the RNC establishment versus grassroots America first. What say you?
Well, part of the background here, and maybe useful for your listeners to know, is that, of course, Watley was the chair of the North Carolina Republican Party before he became the co-chair, or whatever you want to call him, of the National Republican Party, where Laura Trump was kind of babysitting him. But 3 years after the 2020 election fiasco, when we had all the questions about the ballot marking device machines, Dominion, Hart Intercivic, ES&S, Watley puts himself up for re-election as chair of the North Carolina Republican Party and has the team develop the cell phone app under which the election for the chair would take place on the cell phone app. And that just ripped the party apart, because that cell phone app, first of all, there's a push toward paper ballots, and especially within the North Carolina Republican Party, the push toward paper ballots. He has a cell phone app. He's running against a patriot named John Kane, and you can't verify anything about it. There were reports that folks outside of the convention hall were voting, even reports of folks outside of the state who can't even be verified as legitimate voters voting in the North Carolina in the chairmanship race in 2023, again, 3 years after the 2020 fiasco. So because of that, the North Carolina Republican Party is split down the middle, probably more than down the middle. I think we're split our way because there was so much discussed about that little shenanigan that he pulled. And so a lot of folks don't realize that, but there was already a grassroots against this fellow before the president decided to, I suppose, anoint him. And as far as we know, not only we know he wasn't the president's first choice, because we know Laura Trump was, but above and beyond that, we have credible sources that the president talked to at least two other members of the North Carolina congressional delegation about primarying Tillis. So it's likely that Watley is probably the president's third or fourth choice if we can get right down to it. He was not selected for the cabinet. There were 15 major cabinet positions. He wasn't one of the 15. He wasn't selected as the White House chief of staff, as we hear that he wanted to be. And so here we are. President, we love the president in many ways, but a number of his endorsements. He endorsed Lindsey Graham. What else do I need to say? And so I tell folks in North Carolina, well, with President endorsed him, I said, well, General Flynn and Vandersteel are with me, and that gets their attention. And then I say, hey, you're going to vote for Lindsey Graham if he moves to North Carolina and runs for the Senate? And they kind of look there with a blank face. And so we just kind of take a grain of salt. I think these endorsements are meaning less and less, as reflected in that poll. And I can guarantee you, Carolina Journal did not want to publish the results of that poll.
Yeah, I'm sure they didn't. And frankly, if I was to, assess where these endorsements are coming from, they're coming from right here. This woman right here, Susie Wiles. Susie Wiles, and I'm not, you can comment on this or not, that's totally up to you, but she got honored as the Statesman of the Year by the Florida GOP. But if you really dive into Susie Wiles, she's very well connected into the governor's candidate that got the nod from President Trump, Byron Donalds, who's unfortunately for him, all of his malfeasance and issues that are just surfacing like just bad, dirty laundry is popping up everywhere. And then, of course, you also look at the connection back to the RNC chair, Michael Watley, his connection to Susie Wiles and so on and so forth. And then you consider Lindsey Graham, who has worked very closely with John McCain, who was very instrumental with his team to bring the Russian dossier collusion hoax nonsense out. So, the nonsense continues, it continues, and it always comes back to the same sewer. So I agree with you. I don't think these Trump endorsements are carrying a lot of weight these days, and Americans are waking up to it because, frankly, they're feeling the pain of these Trump endorsements because we're seeing the establishment swamp continue to flourish, and the lack of accountability and due process for the people who needed it is not forthcoming. So, do you have an opinion on the connectivity of Susie Wiles and some of these endorsements and why they're just not resonating with Americans at this point?
I do sort of have an opinion. I can tell you that if you look at the history of this race today, Tillis is the still sitting incumbent senator in North Carolina, and and had become extremely unpopular in many ways because he was trying to undermine the president's agenda. Part of that had to do with undermining the president's nominees. And as you know, I've worked with Pete Hegseth in the past, and we worked very closely on at least a couple of military justice cases. And the president wound up pardoning Lieutenant Clinton Lawrence, an Army paratrooper, 82nd Airborne. Pete and I worked very closely on together with some other JAG officers as well, not just me, but a team of us working on the case. And so, but Pete and I became friends during that period of time. And one of the things that that really set me off is that Tillis had promised that he would support the president's nominees coming out of committee. So Pete comes out of the Armed Services Committee, and you would think he was clear. And then at that point, Tillis tried to torpedo that nomination anyway by getting some statement from one of Pete's former sister-in-law, something like that. It didn't go anywhere, but Tillis tried. I jumped in. At that point, there were three candidates in the Republican race. It was me. I jumped in. Another Republican, Andy Nilsen, had been in the race. Andy's now out of the race. A good guy is out of the race, and Tillis, and so we move on into the spring, and General Flynn first endorsed me early June, and has re-endorsed, by the way, and I appreciate that. But not long after that, the president became so disenchanted with Tillis that Tillis dropped out of the race. So when Tillis dropped out of the race, in some ways it changed the dynamic because the principal target number one was already gone. So you ask about Susie Wiles. At that point, our campaign had some communication with the White House, and we were told that we would have an opportunity to make our case before the president endorsed anybody, because he said, "I'm going to endorse somebody." And so he went for about a solid month with Laura Trump sort of toying with the idea of it. I never believed she was going to really jump in anyway. I made the public statement. If he jumped in, I would have gone to the beach. She didn't jump in. I didn't think she was going to jump in. So when she did not jump in, then Whatley appears out of the blue, and Trump, I suppose, endorses him or whatever he's done with him. So to answer your question, we were told by the White House we would have an opportunity to make our case. We were never given that opportunity. Not that it would have necessarily made any difference, but we were told that. And so I suspect that your suspicions on how this came about is probably dead on and right on mark.
Mm. Well, I think that is going to continue to be exposed. It's unfortunate that good Americans who have done well for this country for decades are expendable when it comes to this administration and overlooked for establishment, for status quo, because this runs antithetical to everything that MAGA stood for, what we believed we were going to see after Trump won, when we got Trump back again, and we all worked our tails off to get him back in. Millions of Americans did that. And so I think the level of disappointment at this time can only be outshined by people like you who continue to do the right thing for the right reasons, even when the right people aren't looking or are being persuaded to look somewhere else. So that being said, let's get back to your state, because your state was hit hard after Hurricane Helene. I was there for 10 weeks on the ground. I witnessed and exposed FEMA's failures and overreach, where they were just basically impossible to ignore. You've spoken about restoring constitutional authority at the state level. What does that look like in practice, so that we can, sort of keep FEMA and the federal government's usurpation of your constitutional right, keep the folks in North Carolina out of that harm's way?
Well, I proposed what's called a Deep State Reduction Act. And in other words, under the proposal, and it's a proposal, George S. Patton said this. He said, "An imperfect plan recklessly and violently executed is better than a perfect plan sitting on the shelf and gathering dust." It's kind of in line with what FEMA, Lord have mercy, Elon Musk and Doge proposed when they proposed elimination of 300 out of 400 federal agencies. We need to have a radical approach like that. And if an agency cannot be absolutely justified from the Constitution, it's got to go. And that's for a number of reasons. We have an exploding national debt, $37,000 a second. The national debt continues to explode. And we're going to go off a cliff if we don't arrest it. FEMA is one of the agencies that would go. It would go into the ash heap of history. In Western North Carolina, the estimates right now are we're still $60-70 billion short of monies that are needed to restore people back in their homes, et cetera. What I would like to see is that money set aside in the trust fund, administered by 3 organizations. I would have Samaritan's Purse as one of the organizations because they've been so effective on the ground. Probably another Christian or charitable organization, maybe Adam Smith's group, and then a third organization consisting of the local counties that are affected. and let those folks get the money directly to where it needs to be to rebuild. The problem right now that we've had both with FEMA here and you may or may not be aware of this, but Hurricane Matthew came through 9 years ago in eastern North Carolina. If you get a chance to go to Craven County, you should do that. There's still at least 5,000 North Carolinians whose homes have been displaced because of the Democrats' foolishness there. But they set up these bureaucratic organizations, and then they make it almost impossible to get the money out of these organizations. And the organizations just keep the money themselves. So we've got to attack the problem. That means getting rid of
We lost everything. We lost buildings.
FEMA's gotten in the way. They come in and we have reports of them coming in when you have churches that have been, well stocked with foods and blankets and mattresses, and FEMA wants to take control of the property and determine where it goes. They've been nothing but obstructionists. When Reagan said you got to get the government off to get back to the people, this applies largely to hurricane relief as well. So we're going to try to get something to get. There's a long ways to go. As you may know, Watley was appointed by President Trump as the czar to finish the problem.
In the wake of Helene and through my investigation over the following month, it seems
it's a tragedy, and my heart goes out to those people. And I still speak to a lot of people on the ground there, and we're looking at some of the most ridiculous, obstructions of people getting their lives
leading to
restored,
more
such
serious
as
questions than answers.
8,000 homes that had small bridges
kept on saying they were
crossed
finding
little
bodies,
brooks or streams or just teeny little bodies of water.
Questions about
and
weather
they're bridges that were built to support emergency vehicles, etc. But now, because of new statutes and so forth, they've got to build it to interstate highway code, which is $50,000, $60,000 or more. It's insanity. These people don't have the money, and of course they know this. So they're trying to prevent the ability for
when
these
you
people
lose
to move
everything,
back home.
it's
FEMA,
like
of
your
course, moving
birth
their goalposts
certificate,
of what
all
considers to
your
be
bank
flood zone,
statements, and
eliminating the
like
ability for people to rebuild, the constant destruction of getting these permits. All of this has really left people in harm's way. And then, of course, child protective services. We'll get to that in a minute. I want to talk about lithium, quartz silica, rare earth mineral extraction, because again, I looked at what happened in the hurricane. I looked at the Defense Production Act. I looked at the DOD, the Department of Energy, and North Carolina sits on some of the richest lithium quartz deposits in America. But residents fear the environmental destruction, the corporate theft, and the foreign buyouts. What is your position? Would you support the citizen-owned mineral royalty model similar to Alaska's permanent fund?
Purchased it in a generator.
Yeah,
got a letter saying that
coming in on the back of your audio there, so I'm not sure what that is.
FEMA, on the other hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me do. Is that off? Is that out?
You are loud. Lehman Charlie, as we say in the military, loud and clear.
Lehman Charlie. Sorry about that.
you're now Lehman Charlie. I heard I heard some questions about rare earth minerals, but I couldn't hear a whole lot of that.
Okay. No worries. I thought I had the audio muted. My apologies, because it wasn't playing on my end, so I'm not sure why you would even hear it. I apologize for that.
It was good work, though. I'll tell you.
Sorry about that. Well, the good news is the audience didn't get distracted with that. But I was talking about your rare earth minerals, your lithium, your quartz. And of course, the folks in your community really do fear environmental destruction, the corporate theft, the foreign buyouts. What's your position? Would you actually support a citizen-owned mineral royalty model like what they do in Alaska with the permanent fund?
I think that will be helpful. You think about it, Ann. Well, look at what we've come through with COVID and all of the woke policies that have been that the government has used major corporations to ram down our throats. Mussolini himself said that corporatism is the cornerstone of fascism.
Yes.
And therefore I believe in local ownership. I'm not talking about in a socialist way, but I mean getting local folks involved in order to protect the resources, to protect the land, to protect the environment. Western North Carolina is a target in many ways. These 25 counties are some of the most precious resources, some of the most precious people, some of the most down to earth and God-fearing, red-blooded Americans that you will find anywhere in the country. And so we're looking at the danger of raping the land through lithium mines, and all the way to overzealous developers trying to come in and change the nature of the land. And so I would be favorable to looking at some sort of model to try to strike that balance. But I want to make sure there are all kinds of concerns about the federal lack of response and the delay. And why is that delay there? They're trying to starve people out so they'll get them out of the area and then come in and eventually try to take the land through eminent domain. That's why I'm saying earlier, you got to find out a way to put together a a fund administered by organizations that we can trust. And notice when I said Samaritan's Purse, I'm not, because they have been on the ground, and I trust Franklin Graham with his ability to reach people. I want to find, private folks rather than governmental entities to try to get the money out of these folks. So,
Sure.
but I certainly answer your question. Yes, I would favorably look at something like that in order to try to put a block on what appears to be a very dangerous red sign here.
Yeah, it really does. And of course, you have to layer on the fact that President Trump and his administration are pushing for a massive, America to be the number one AI country in the world, right? We're going to be it. And we're seeing, we've got a battle right here in my backyard. They want to build the largest data center for AI right here in the backyard of where I live. And you can better believe we're going to be fighting that tooth and nail. It's a strain on our water resources, on the environment, on the indigenous creatures that live around here. And of course, I have to ask myself, is AI, the new push for AI, considering we now know, the gatekeeper of climate change himself, Bill Gates, all of a sudden miraculously decided, the climate's fine, no worries at all. But you know what? AI is where it's at. So to me, I feel like we're exchanging one giant taxpayer NGO money laundering hoax for another.
Right.
Where do you see all this stacking up?
Well, I wish that the Doge cuts had been codified. As Elon himself pointed out, these NGOs, they have the same model. They will step forward with some sort of altruistic goal: save the whales, save the penguins, save the spotted owls, save the Democrats, whatever it is. They've only got to give away 5%. All the money inside of them grows tax free. And if I've got enough money to set up private foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I can take the money from one to give to the next, It becomes a circular cesspool, and it goes to help Democrat causes. And the root of the problem is the tax system that we have. If you eliminate the income tax, you eliminate the deductions, these NGOs go away, but they're pushing agendas and you can't trust them. And you've got to look with a great deal of suspicion now that Gates has gone from climate change, he was in the vaccines business for a while there too. And I assume that he probably is, and so from there to climate change, now to AI, it is a suspicious concern. And I think that we need to change the track structure to end these NGOs. They have altruistic purposes. They never solve the problem they're trying to solve anyway. They use it as a money drawing scam, and they should not be. There should not be a tax system that allows these creatures to function, in my opinion.
Could not agree with you more. I think the entire Internal Revenue Service is a scam. I think most Americans agree with that. In fact, I met a gentleman who was a very high net worth tax attorney, and he told me once he met me on the plane, and he looked at me and said, "I know who you are." And I laughed, and I thought to myself, if this is a good or a bad thing. And he said, "No, you're doing the right thing, because 60% of Americans aren't filing returns anymore. They know it's voluntary. They know they don't have to, and they know it's a scam, and they know the money isn't coming back into the country." So, I think people are finally waking up to that. President Trump has alluded to it.
Yes.
Governor DeSantis in Florida has talked about, eliminating property tax.
Right.
Paul Renner doing the same, who's running for, the governor's slot. So there is this conversation that's happening out there. And I'm glad to see you put it in black and red on your website. So I appreciate that.
We're going to push for an Internal Revenue Service Elimination Act, which is on our website. And, I know you probably heard the president's interview with Joe Rogan. Some have, some haven't. And of course, I have a great deal of respect for the president. He's pardoned two of my clients.
Yes,
Lawrence,
absolutely. We want him to be successful. Absolutely.
Yeah. But if you think about his, he goes from talking about the Civil War, how that Robert E. Lee lived inside of Lincoln's head because he couldn't beat Lincoln until he found a drunk from Ohio named U.S. Grant. And he goes from there to the need for nuclear energy to be restored, but with small reactors like the French. And then he goes from there to tariffs. And of course, he talks about all the money that was brought in by tariffs during the McKinley administration. But the thing that is not said that folks should think about is this: that during that period of time, from 1880 until about 1913, when, in my judgment, we made the largest constitutional mistake ever with the 16th Amendment to bring the income tax in. That's a huge mistake. During that period of time, about 33, 34, 35 years, the United States underwent the greatest industrial revolution in history. Right. But here's the rest of the story: was zero income tax.
Right.
Zero income tax. And it's got to go, because it isn't just the lack of fairness of the system, with 60% not filing or paying anyway, with the money going overseas, but it's these NGO creatures that are that exist out there that allow billionaires like Bill Gates and George Soros and others to effectuate public policy on their own terms because the tax system is corrupt.
That's
So
right.
you just get rid of it, you cut it out, and it's got to go. And I will
Yeah.
continue. I will fight for that from the floor of the Senate. I know we're going to have some more help on that, but it's a torch that has to be borne, and I'm prepared to do that.
Do you have some creatures in the Senate, maybe those running or those already there, some folks that you think you might align with to find the political will to drag this across the finish line?
You got a small number of those who might be candidates. Maybe Rand Paul will be a candidate. Maybe Mike Lee will be a candidate. I don't know what Senator Kennedy would say about it. I don't know what Ted Cruz would say about it. The Senate itself is full of a bunch of, the Republicans are full of a bunch of rhino moderates.
Yeah.
Some are a lot worse than others. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, look at Texas, John Cornyn. Look at here in North Carolina with Tillis. Look across the border here. My office right now is 3 miles from the South Carolina. We go across the line, you got Lindsey Graham.
Yes.
So, but we've got to start building constitutional conservatives within the Senate.
That's
I've thought about that. Who am I going to align with? Those names, come to mind. I mean, Ron Johnson, maybe up in Wisconsin, did a lot of he caught out the vax, and he was pretty outspoken on some of the election fraud stuff. But we still, the problem we have as Republicans, I've made this argument a lot of times, and I'll make it again. The Democrat Congresses historically, especially in the beginning of the 20th century, have been disastrous. It's been Democrat Congresses that brought in the 16th Amendment for federal income tax. That brought in the first Income Tax Act under Woodrow Wilson. That brought in the Federal Reserve Act, all in that one swoop. And then you move into the 1930s with Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, and that's when the deep state began to explode. And then you have Lyndon Johnson with the Great Society in the 60s, and then you have Obamacare. Those are 4 huge moves from Democrat Congresses that have basically changed who we are and turned us into a monopolistic. I'm looking for that word, deep state, with these creatures with tentacles. But
Yes.
Republican Congress has been weak. When we've had control of Congress, we have failed to eradicate the Democrats' damage. And you go back, and if you want one example of that, look at McCain with Obamacare. And we have to have the Constitution calls for the Congress to step up as the first branch of government. And we've had weak Republican leadership. We're going to have to go after this deep state and take it out. And they're going to cry and whine. It's like they said about Margaret Thatcher. They called her the milk snatcher. But we're going to have to take away Obamacare. We're going to have to take away Obama phones. We're going to have to take away all these goods and services they think they're entitled to. And it's going to mean a war to do it. But if we don't do it, we're going to lose $1. And if we lose $1, here's what's going to happen. And if you go back and you look in history, every major nation that's ever controlled the earth has had the dominant currency of the earth. You read the New Testament, the Romans had the denarius. And then the President Trump talks about a golden age. He's talking about the Dutch. The Dutch had the gilding. A couple of months ago, we had Columbus Day. The Spanish had the peso. The British, they said that the sun would never set on British soil, had the pound sterling, which fell to the dollar at Bretton Woods. And
Yep.
we are an economic superpower because of the dollar. But we just keep exploding the debt and exploding the debt. And once the dollar collapses, because we don't have the discipline to reduce the debt. See, it doesn't matter just slowing the rate of spending. Yeah, we slowed the rate of spending since Biden was in from about $55,000 a second, the debt exploding, increasing in that now to about $37,000 a second. I was going up to Asheville about a month ago. Anna, you've probably seen this site. It's usdebtclock.org.
Yes.
Yeah, and so usdebtclock.org. I'd encourage your listeners and viewers to go there. You can see the debt exploding in front of your own eyes. And I was going up to Asheville, and I was watching that clock, and I set my cell phone for 1 minute. A minute later, there you go. A minute later, the alarm goes off. The debt had increased by $2 million in 1 minute.
Yeah.
And that's in 1 minute. $2.8 billion a day, 37,000 a second. You see, we are still losing the war, even with Republican Congress, because we haven't reversed that. We've got to reverse that, or we're going to lose our country. You know what's going to happen? Once the dollar implodes, and there's a conglomerate of nations, BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and others trying to attack the dollar and replace it. They're not going to replace it with another paper currency. It's not going to be the pound sterling and the Canadian dollar or the franc or the euro dollar or anything. No, they're going to want to replace it with something called central bank digital currency. And if you think the COVID scam was a pre-runner of tyranny, you ain't seen nothing yet. We've got to wake up when you have to attack the problem aggressively from the floor of the Senate and the House, and Congress has to have the guts to do it, or we're going to lose. We're going to lose our constitutional republic, which is exactly what they're pushing for.
Yeah. I know we are in a very difficult, very, very difficult spot right now. And unfortunately, it's as if I don't think that I just don't get the feeling that it's understood even by the people that are sitting in the Oval Office currently. Because when I look at their, the Genius Act and the Clarity Act and the desire to put everybody, with the uh, digital currencies such as, oh my God, I just had a complete brain meltdown.
Bitcoin, that's right.
Bitcoin, thank you. I kept thinking bricks. Bitcoin.
Glad to help.
Yeah, Bitcoin, putting Bitcoin out there as the strategic reserve backed by treasuries, which is, let's be honest, we create treasuries and then we have a fiat currency by the treasuries. And then we have, the federal government buy the treasuries back with the fiat currency that they're borrowing. I mean, you can't buy debt with debt. This is total corruption on so many levels. And somehow people believed it for, a period, since Bretton Woods, really. And it's shocking to me now that we don't have, since we took ourselves off the gold standard, something of real value that has been biblical value for 5,000 plus years. And we put ourselves on the oil and now we're no longer the petrodollar. We're just, what are we? We are zero.
And that's a good point. The people who understand Nixon made a mistake of taking us off.
Well, that was Kissinger.
I think in 71. Here's what he tried to do to make up for it. He tried to insert this petrodollar arrangement, which forced the dollars all around the world, all oil to this purchase to be exchanged to dollars, which gave us a little bit of gave the dollar some stability. But Saudi Arabia has been trying to do away with that, and they were pushing that very hard. Yeah. And listen, I believe if the Democrats have stolen the election again this time, I think we've lost a dollar already.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we would have. But it's not. You cannot mathematically tax our way out of it. It's absolutely impossible. It can only come by identifying the problem and taking out the deep state and stop this crazy spending that we have. We have to understand that. And you're right. I'm not sure that the advisors in the White House understand it, or maybe they would just want to kick the can down the road. I mean, it's been kicked the can down the road, and this is what I'm saying. We've been dealing. Look, if this guy Watley that I'm running against, if he were able somehow to get the nomination, which I don't think he will, we're going to take him out. And if he were able to get past Cooper, which he can't, all you have is till this part two. You have status quo republicanism, and status quo republicanism will lead us right off the cliff. We've got to come to that realization. Yeah, it might slow down. In some ways, it might slow down, the walk to the edge of the plank, but we're still walking to the edge of the plank.
We are. It's as if we are still being sort of hoodwinked with the whole "Make America Great" thing. But we've shelved America first. We're putting on a MAGA, basically a MAGA bag over our heads, and we're being walked right into the New World Order. I feel like we're approaching the Hunger Games, frankly, with the way things are going. But all right, I want to bring it back to something that's near and dear to my heart, something that I learned intimately when I was in North Carolina. We have been very involved. Our foundation, which takes advantage of the 501(c)(3) tax-free donations, and we use all that money not to pay ourselves, but to do the work that we're doing with respect to Child Protective Services. I'm a big anti-agency government person. I'm a very strong constitutional government person. You know this. You've listened to me speak. I believe we should abolish all of these corrupt agencies, particularly with the ones that are attacking our children, our future of our country. So across the country, we've now, including in your state, DCF, Department of Children and Families, or the Department of Social Services, all under the umbrella of CPS, Child Protective Services, are agencies that are taking children without adequate due process. We are filing a lawsuit right now in Massachusetts. Parents are terrified. What reforms would you champion? Should North Carolina adopt a parent's Bill of Rights with legal teeth, including penalties? Or is our Constitution and your state constitution, strong enough to include penalties for these wrongful removals? Because if you know anything about Child Protective Services, 95% of the cases don't even meet the legal threshold, which means if you eliminate those 95% of the cases, the amount of money required for the state to even engage in these horrific activities gets reduced by 95%.
It's one of those things, that is sold having some sort of altruistic purpose, but winds up being sinister in its execution. I share the exact same views as you do. I get calls all the time from, and a lot of times it's Christians they're going after, or they're trying to pull kids out of Christian homes and put them in Muslim homes. The sinister political objectives above and beyond just stealing kids from their parents in violation of the United States Constitution has gone off the charts. I think that it's an agency. I think the CPS is an agency, and I would say this across the nation, that probably should be eliminated. And yeah, you got to protect kids somehow, but the government doesn't have the best ability to do that. And we already have criminal laws, statutes on the books to protect kids anyway. So why are you going to need this monolithic agency that is clearly doing more damage than good? And again, in the situation for the national level, we have a $38 trillion national debt. We have the debt, in the state of North Carolina, our Republican General Assembly largely has spending pretty much under control. What's going on in North Carolina is minuscule compared to the national level. But I like to see CPS go. I like to see the Department of Social Services go. I think it's just a bunch of liberal garbage, and I don't see any constitutional role for any of it.
I couldn't agree more. Back when we think about it, when Hurricane Helene, perfect example, FEMA wasn't there first. It was your neighbor.
Right.
And frankly, we've always helped. It's always been neighbor to neighbor, family to family. And when the state intervenes and gets in the middle of it and throws up statutes and red flags and, takes your child because you don't want to give it a vitamin K shot, which there's no law, even statutory on the books that talks about something as insane as that, we have a real problem. So how do you hold state agencies accountable when they violate constitutional rights? We've seen Loper Bright overturned. We no longer have to worry about the Chevron doctrine, supposedly, because that was supposedly fixed in the Supreme Court, but we still get this intervention. So, speak to us as an attorney and how do you get judicial reform here?
A couple of things. Well, you could, and I'll talk through them and tell you why it's probably not the best solution. You could have, you could step up criminal prosecutions for a violation of constitutional rights, which is already on the books nationally. I mean,
it's not enforced.
That's correct, but it's not enforced. It's not enforced, correct. So even if you did it at the state level, it's not going to be enforced. Good idea, but not enforced. So therefore, it becomes a paper tiger. You could allow, parents, the right to sue, which is there to a degree already, and provide for attorney's fees provisions, but it's very, very, very difficult. Even if I give you the right to sue and give you some pretty heavy teeth in the penalty phase, punitive damages, right to attorney's fees, or whatever, the lawsuits are still a monstrosity for the average person to deal with. Therefore, it isn't practical. The practical thing is to cut the funding. Right. The practical thing is to take, a meat cleaver to these agencies and just get rid of them. That is the quickest, the best, the only way to provide for relief. But it also puts more pressure on the elected representatives. Now, I say pressure. For me, I'm glad to do it, but some don't want to do it. They would rather pass these paper tiger solutions that I suggested earlier, or point to the fact that the federal government could, if it wanted, prosecute for deprivation of a constitutional rights under the color of your office. And by the way, I think, off top a little bit, Fannie Willis, Jack Smith, Letitia James, and Alvin Bragg ought to be prosecuted under that by Pam Bondi already. But you see, that applies to state actors as well. But it isn't happening. So it's a matter of cutting the agency and eliminating it. That is the only and the most effective solution to providing relief.
Well, you went there, so I'm going to go there. You brought up the name Pam Bondi. Thumbs up or thumbs down right now?
Say that again.
Pam Bondi. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Is she doing the job that we wanted, or is she doing the job that you wanted?
I'm disappointed, extremely disappointed. We've seen zero. Look, all right. Look, so we had indictments against Comey and against Letitia James, which were dismissed without prejudice. But we should never be in a position where they were dismissed at all because they didn't get the indictments in within 120 days. And of course, the judge's ruling was a suspect there. And you can bring it back against Letitia James. Comey's going to have a statute of defense argument that he will raise. But where are the prosecutions? I'm extremely disappointed that we haven't seen prosecutions. You can't let these clowns get away with what they get. What I'm talking about now, I wrote a book called Kangaroo Court, which I'll send you a copy. You text me your address offline. I'll send you a copy of it. But we look at not just the Trump prosecutions, but a number of other prosecutions the Democrats have brought about. Really going back 30 years. For example, they prosecuted Rick Perry when he was governor of Texas for vetoing a bill, which he was able to do under the Texas Constitution. You may remember the governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell. They prosecuted him and his wife for extortion because the governor accepted a gift which he was allowed to do under Virginia law, and he disclosed it. they were convicted. He and his wife were convicted. That was reversed 8-0 by the U.S. Supreme Court after $27 million. But they've gone after average Americans too. You may remember the McCloskeys, Mark and
Yes,
Patricia
I know the
McCloskey.
McCloskeys. Yeah, good people.
Yeah. These are average people. And
Yep.
and that was Kimberly Gardner, by the way, who was a Soros prosecutor.
Yep.
These prosecutors need to be prosecuted.
Yes.
And the theme of my book is it's time to prosecute the prosecutors because they have bastardized our court system. Where's Pam Bondi? I've seen so up or down.
So since you've served as both a federal prosecutor and a JAG officer, how does this background then prepare you to confront this kangaroo court corruption inside our federal and state agencies? What do we do here? Because from where I'm sitting, we don't have enough leverage inside the House, inside the Senate, to actually affect some impeachment of these people. These people need to be, these federal judicial judges need to be impeached, starting with them. And then we got to get the people in the states to do the same thing. The state legislatures, we've got to clean up our backyard. But like you just said, Soros has done a great job of financing and getting all these people. And we now know through the election theft. I mean, Sydney's work that she's done, the work that Byrne is releasing, and others on this, on what's going on in Venezuela, it's all coming to a head right now. We understand the theft. This is sort of one of those alter and abolish moments that needs to be done in one big sweep, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, as a member of the U.S. Senate, I'm 1 out of 100, but we don't have anybody speaking to this issue. I don't hear one senator saying, "Where are your prosecutions, Pam?" You know, our leadership in Congress has to show some leadership and step up and at least put pressure using some sort of bully pulpit on judges. You mentioned judges. Here's what I want folks to understand: when you go to Article 3 of the Constitution, there are all kinds of these constitutional fictions that we talk about. For example, separation of church and state, not in the Constitution. The notion we're a democracy, no, not in the Constitution. We're only a republic, and the founders hated democracy. I could quote you on that. But another one is this notion that we have co-equal branches of government. Not true at all. When the Constitution was passed in 1787, September 17th, it still had to be ratified. And these anti-federalists, who were some of our greatest patriots, Patrick Henry, didn't want it because they thought it would bring too much centralized power to the government. They were primarily concerned about federal judges. And so Alexander Hamilton writes in Federalist 78, he says, first off, the judiciary will be the weakest by far branch of government because it can't, it doesn't have the power of the purse like the Congress or the power of the sword like the executive. He also pointed out that no federal judge can ever order the president around. And now look what we have. And when you go to the Article 3 of the Constitution, here's what it says. It says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, but get this, and such other inferior courts. Supreme Court and then inferior courts, and then get this, as Congress, remember that word, as Congress, they from time to time ordain and establish. So you have the Supreme Court, which is below the other branches. Then you have inferior courts at the Court of Appeals level, and inferior to that, you have district court judges. 670 of them. The Democrats think they can order the president to turn around a plane with a bunch of foreign, illegal thugs going back to Central America.
Right.
The Congress has the power to clip their wings. Congress can these courts
defund it, shut it down.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And you can do that more easily than you can actually impeach a judge. Just shut the court. As far as I'm concerned, when the district attorney for the District of Columbia, United States Attorney, I should say, for D.C., and the Justice Department underwent all this J6 charade prosecutions, which was a Federation. Those prosecutions were an absolute attack on the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution, the First Amendment. Just cut the money. If you're going to have a cesspool of a federal court system, cut the money to it. Congress has the ability to do that. People don't understand it. It's not like they don't have control over these judges. It's just that they don't have the political will to assert the control over these judges. This Boasberg guy, who does he think he is? Or I could cite you a number of them that are just totally out of control. Cut the money for their seats and be done with it.
That's exactly right. Yet they don't seem to have the political will to want to do it, Don. And so, this goes right into my next question. What would be your top 3 legislative priorities in your first 100 days as U.S. Senator?
Well, the first is to try to get some. I'm going to push the Deep State Reduction Act, try to attack the national debt. I'm going to beat that drum, number one. Number two, medical freedom. We haven't talked about that, but I've been very involved in the medical freedom movement. Was involved in major litigation concerning the vaccine. Sued Savannah River Nuclear Solutions on behalf of about 78 plaintiffs, mostly nuclear engineers from the Biden administration. They threatened to cut Department of Energy money to that contractor if they didn't force their folks to take the jab. And took that all the way to the Fourth Circuit before Biden backed down. And I'm going to push for vaccination and mass protection at the federal level so that never again can any private employer or governmental entity force you to put anything in your body that you want to put in your body. And it's absolutely ridiculous.
It is.
That includes not just vaccinations, it includes microchips. And the World Economic Forum is already talking about microchip insertion. I'm going to stand for medical freedom. I've been in touch with Simone Gold. We talk from time to time.
Right.
But we're going to battle for that. Nobody else is talking about that. The third is getting these out of control federal judges in control. So I'm going to push for a Judicial Separation of Powers Act to remind these judges of their limitations under Federal 78, that they are the inferior branch. They don't have power over the executive, and specifically to remove any authority that they think they have, which they don't anyway, over immigration and naturalization and over the U.S. military. So you're looking at attacking the debt with a Deep State Reduction Act. You're looking at medical freedom, and you're looking at reining these federal judges in. That's where I would start.
Right.
We go a long ways from there. I can tell you that.
Well, if we can rein these federal judges in, it's going to be huge for freedom fighters around the country, frankly, because we're all hamstrung. Nothing made me happier when I saw President Trump give Boasberg the Heisman and turn that plane and ignore his instructions to turn a plane around full of Tren de Aragua on its way to El Salvador prisons.
If you go back to the Civil War, the classic cases, and Lincoln read the Federalist Papers. So you had a Confederate sympathizer named John Merriman, who was being held at Fort McHenry. You remember Old Sake, you see from the Star Spangled Banner, Fort McHenry. And the Supreme Court had 5 members. The Chief Justice was Roger Taney. They issued a habeas corpus to Lincoln to take the sympathizer out of the Confederate of the prison and bring him before the Supreme Court. In other words, remove Merriman from Fort McHenry and bring him before the court so we can have a trial. You know what Lincoln did? That order, he just ignored it. Lincoln understood the limitation of the court's power.
Right.
Trump, he did ignore Boasberg's order, and correctly. Boasberg had no authority to give the order to begin with.
Right.
But there have been other cases that he has gone along with it. So if you go back to 2017, and you remember the travel ban in 2017.
Right.
Trump issues that travel ban order from about 7 Sharia countries. Democrats sue. They have a judge up in Washington, Judge Robards, and then in Hawaii, Derek Watson, who was Obama's law school classmate, deem it unconstitutional. The Ninth Circuit says unconstitutional. 1 year and 4 months later, the Supreme Court reverses to Democrat judges and reinstates a travel ban. So Trump went along with them there. It's a political, risk to tell these judges they can go cram it. And I think Trump knows that, I suppose, but he did the right thing in that situation with Boasberg and that order just to ignore it. And he was constitutionally sound to do that.
Great. All right, let's wrap this up here. What separates you from Michael Watling in terms of governing philosophy, accountability, courage? And why is this race more than about just a primary? Why is it really more about the soul and direction of the Republican Party?
Well, I'll go back and quote President Trump himself in 2016 when he said, "Drain the swamp." And you and I know it needs to be drained. And here's what President Trump says specifically. We need to get lobbyists out of government.
Bingo.
Michael Watling has been a lobbyist. Okay.
Yep.
I'm a military officer. You want a lobbyist or a military officer? You want a lobbyist or a constitutional lawyer? You want a lobbyist or somebody who's fought for medical freedom and fought for the freedom of our military service members who are prosecuted under the Obama rules of engagement and fought against, election fraud? You want a fighter or a Washington insider? And really, that's what it boils down to. I'm America first. That means putting the United States Constitution first. That means limited government. That means understanding the Article 1, Section 8, your limited powers. Everything else goes back to the states. If you cannot justify an agency, it goes. The IRS has got to go. The Department of Education's got to go. FEMA, you can throw it on the trash can and burn it up.
Yep.
This gets in the way. And I am going to wage a war against the deep state. Whatley will, if he were able to get in the Senate, he'll hold his head down and he will obey the ghost of Mitch McConnell and do whatever John Thune tells him to do. I'm probably going to be the least popular member of the Republican caucus on the Senate, but I'm going to put America first and put my state first, and the rest can kind of fall into place because I got nothing to lose.
Now you're going to have the popularity of the American people behind you from where I'm sitting, and I think anybody watching this is going to completely agree. So let's put it this way. If you win this primary, what's your message to Roy Cooper, who polls show you beating by double digits at this point?
Say, get ready. I'm going to chase you all over the state and remind you of what you did to the state during COVID. For me, and I shared this story I'll share with you, with Roy Cooper, for me, it's personal. Because the last time I saw my daddy alive, my sister Amy and I were standing outside of a nursing home in Plymouth, North Carolina, on a patch of frozen grass from the outside, looking inside, waving to our daddy, who was just a few weeks away from leaving this earth. Roy Cooper, with his unconstitutional mandates, separated dying North Carolinians in nursing homes from their families. He shut the state down. He did irreparable damage. He has been the most radical left-wing governor in the state's history. And if you remember that the horrific stabbing of this poor girl, Arena, on the Charlotte light rail, well, Roy Cooper commuted the sentences of 15 animals, just like that animal that killed Arena, on the day that he left office. These are animals who murdered North Carolinians. I'm going to remind him of that every day of the campaign trail. He is a target-rich political environment. We're going to take him down. As I say, we're going to take down Governor Lockdown.
I love it. Where can North Carolinians volunteer, donate, and join your grassroots movement?
Well, yes, ma'am. Our website is brown4nc, brown4nc.com. And you can go in there and contact us. You can send us $25, $50, up to $3,500 if you wanted to. But we're grateful for anything and everything we can get. We are fighting a machine. We're fighting a fundraising establishment machine that wants to preserve the status quo. And we cannot survive much longer on the status quo. We've got to make a change, and we don't have a lot of time in. So please go to brown4nc.com. Help us any way you can. We need your money, but we also need. This is going to be a grassroots effort in the primary like the state has never seen, and a lot of people are going to be surprised, some pleasantly so.
I love it. So what's your final message then to the voters who feel ignored by the political establishment?
Well, you are ignored by the establishment. I'm ignored by the establishment. I mean, they're obviously more concerned about preserving the Washingtonian cesspool than about whether we keep our jobs in North Carolina. They could care less about the cost of living. Yes, we've gotten gasoline down, but food prices are too high. We do that by attacking regulation, and the establishment on both sides are ignoring us. I will not ignore. I'm standing with our shrimpers in the eastern part of the state. They try to shut our shrimping businesses down. I'm standing with our mountain counties and our eastern counties that have been neglected by the federal and state government through these hurricane disasters. And we're going to bring this government back to the people. The three most important words of the United States Constitution are in the preamble: we the people. And that's what this campaign is about. It's about putting North Carolinians first and putting Americans first, not the deep state swamp in Washington, D.C. or in Raleigh.
This is such fantastic news. I love the energy you brought to this interview, Don. I can't thank you enough for joining me today. In America, this is the Senate race. That's a preview of 2026, frankly, from where I'm sitting. The people are rising, the establishment's panicking, and today we heard exactly why. Don Brown, thank you for joining us on Steel News today.
Thank you, and I hope to see you again real soon. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. I appreciate you tuning into this very important segment. This has been Don Brown from North Carolina, U.S. Senate candidate. Don, one more time, your website. Where can folks find you?
Brown, the word brown, the word for, brown4nc.com. That's brown4, FORNC.com.
All right. And now a word from our sponsor. Thanks for tuning in.